Hello, Marta. So I'm very excited to introduce a panel of speakers. As you say, this is quite the year to be talking about uncertainty, and I think we are eager to understand better how organizations as distinguished as the ones panelists are leading are able to cope, and in particular how the requirements in terms of skills from the people from within and from outside the organization have changed with this recognition that uncertainty is now paramount, is in front of our very eyes, and the recent events have led to even more volatility or even more uncertainty. So, Marta, if you want, without further ado, I can introduce both of our panelists.
Yes, we want to know our panelists, please, Carlos.
Excellent. So we're lucky today to have two very distinguished organizational leaders, two CEOs of, and this is something I'm excited about, two different kinds of corporations. First, we have Juan Carlos Mora, who's the CEO of Bancolombia and has had a very distinguished career involved in the internationalization of the bank, and also in driving many of the sustainability practices over the last, especially over the last few years. So, hello, Juan Carlos.
Hello, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here talking about uncertainty, which is what we have now around all the time. So it will be a pleasure to share this panel with you, talking about uncertainty.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, let me first, before starting the meat of the panel, let me introduce our second distinguished panelist, who is also the CEO of a very different kind of company, of Tessia, that provides industrial solutions throughout Europe, and is very involved in the industrial equipment and construction equipment and machinery business. So and was trained as a lawyer, was a consultant for a while, and he's Lino Tedeschi, and I think we have him on the line. Hello, Lino.
Yes. Good evening to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Okay, well, so without further ado, I'm eager to jump into the meat of the panel today. And obviously, as I said, it's quite a year to be talking about uncertainty. We've all experienced the results of uncertainty firsthand. We've experienced this black swan event that I don't think any of us at this time last year was really thinking about, which is COVID, of course. And so it's brought to the fore these how fast things can move and how things can change. So the first questions I had to understand how your organizations are dealing with the uncertainty that has now been unleashed is, what is it that you as CEOs sort of worry about in the morning? What is it that you don't know enough about? What are the big sources of uncertainty that you think about in your day-to-day life, right? Because there's the, for a while we were talking about the evolution of the pandemic. Now we don't know exactly, or there's uncertainty around the timing for a vaccine. There's uncertainty about how governments are going to be reacting, and there's changes in that kind of all the time. There's uncertainty about consumers, what they're doing. There's uncertainty about what your workers and employees will be doing. So there's at least all those sorts of uncertainties. I'm sure others that you're thinking about. So what are the ones that you worry about the most, if you wish, the ones that the biggest unknowns at the moment? So first, perhaps Juan Carlos.
Yes, Carlos. As you mentioned, the biggest uncertainty that we have now it's around the COVID evolvement and how it's going to be the evolution of the pandemic. Pandemic changed very much the way we operate. In my case, I was before pandemic. I was worried about more midterm evolution of the environment, how competition is going to evolve, what technology is going to be the one that are going to support our operations. But with the pandemic, things change, and you need to focus more on short term, what you need to do now. First, to protect the health of your employees, your customers, their families, everybody, and how are you going to operate on an environment that change one day to another and force you to do things that you were not prepared to do, basically. So the uncertainty clearly materialized in an event that forced you to change the way you basically foresee the future and focusing more on short term and midterm. That was a big change. Now the pandemic has evolved, and now it's how much is going to last, when is the vaccine going to be available, what are going to be the final social and economic effects. But we cannot forget that before the pandemic, there were a lot of things that we were dealing with, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of volatility. Technology was changing many the way business operates, the way people behave. So we put on top of a very uncertain world pandemic, and that changed the game for a while. But behind that, there are all of that complexity and all of those challenges that we have to deal with what we have in front of us.
Lino, how do you see things from where you are? How do you see the next few months going in terms of managing the different uncertainties that your company, I'm sure, is facing, like every other one?
I think we are coming to terms with the idea that we have to live with the pandemic, but we don't know yet what the extent, the intensity of this pandemic is going to be in the coming 3 or 4 months. So while from February to May, we were living in completely uncharted waters, today we know more about what it means to live with COVID, but we don't know how widespread this pandemic is going to be and what the impact is going to be. I mean, look what is happening today in Spain and in France. If things get worse than they already are today, are we going to have another lockdown? This is going to create havoc in the economy, way beyond what we have seen from March to May. But on the other side, once hospitals will be unable to take more people in intensive care, something will have to be done one way or another. So I still think there is a great degree of uncertainty. We know, though, that give and take by June next year, the worst should be over. The vaccine should be pretty normally available everywhere, and things should slowly return to normal. But until then, how challenging is going to be life with the pandemic, we don't know. I, however, see a positive as well. We have been talking about the need to manage change and innovation during the last several months before the COVID pandemic. Today, we had a jolt in this change, and I think all organizations are far more flexible and open to welcome change, welcome innovation. There is a much greater degree of agility. In normal times, to achieve the degree of agility, flexibility, openness to change that we have today throughout the economy and in society, it would have taken years and years. And I think that this renewed ability to embrace change is also bringing good things. And I have to say, in my group, this has been noticeable. And so far, the results also from business-wise are not as bad as I would have thought would have been in March or April because of that.
So you mentioned, Lino, the issue of agility and flexibility, which is something that all citizens and all organizations have had to live with. So could you give us an example, you, and then I'll ask Juan Carlos, about how that flexibility has translated, particularly since this is a conference about knowledge and learning, about how your organization gathers information or obtains knowledge or does forecasts, right? How have you reconfigured your teams, your gathering of information? Where do you get, uncertainty is a big word, but part of your job is, or your guys' job is to mitigate it. So how do you obtain the knowledge that you need to manage that uncertainty, and how has that changed over the last, I guess, 6 months now that we've been living with this?
There are certain things that we don't know, full stop. And one of them is, the most important, is what is going to be, how long this COVID pandemic is going to last. We can read newspapers, we can spend inordinate amount of time trying to figure it out. Nobody knows the answer yet, certainly not the official one, so it's useless to waste time there. The big challenge is to understand, for us, what is the impact of the measures that Europe, the European Union has taken in order to give a boost to the economy that has been very badly hit by the pandemic. Now, this is the biggest challenge that we have. And the first one is whether this money is going to come. The second, whether our governments will be able to spend it, because this is no minor challenge as well. Particularly if I look at countries like Italy, where the public administration really has a problem in spending money. It's difficult to spend money in Italy. You wouldn't believe it, but it's probably the biggest problem. Now, how do you measure this? How do you find information about it? Look, I would be lying if I were to tell you that there is a way to find out. There is no way. It's a complete crystal ball. What one has to do in this context, and I lived through an even worse crisis many years ago, which was the Balkan Wars. You have to manage the company as you would a boat in rough seas. You have to manage a very tight ship. You have to know where you want to go, and you have to know that you have to survive as long as possible, knowing that you don't know when you will reach a safe harbor. That is what you have to do, in my view, in these very uncertain times. The issue of information, look, if it is the normal market information, we have plenty of data, everyone, data lakes, CRMs, informations, research centers, analysis. That hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. That's the business as usual. The big question mark is how 200 billion euros are going to impact the economy of Italy, and how 750 billion will impact the economy of Europe. That is the big question. But nobody knows the answer yet. And when COVID is going to be over, and nobody knows the answer yet, I wouldn't even spend time trying to figure it out, because there is obviously no answer.
Excellent. All right, Juan Carlos, from a different perspective, a different continent, a different type of industry, what's your take? How has your organization evolved in these 6 months to sort of create structures to manage the pandemic?
Carlos, in this complex time, information is needed more than ever. And there is a problem. There is so many information available that you need to find reliable sources of information that allow you to really manage your business and to understand what is happening. So it's a paradox. You need information, you need a lot of information since there is a lot of complexity, volatility, and there is too many information available. So you need to find a way to convert or to use reliable information and to convert that information into insights that allow you to make decisions. So what we did, we reinforced our internal capabilities around analyzing information from the economic point of view to understand the macro environment and to convert that information into insights. So we reinforced that capability, and also to gather information from customers and not just information, but to process them and to give us insights to allow us to manage. Because, as I mentioned, there is so many sources of information. Another thing that we did is we are going to academia, which is a very good source of structured information to complement more market information, more economic data, and that view from the academia implements your view and allow you to process and support your decisions in this, as we mentioned, complex, volatile world, moving with more information and certainty in your decisions.
But may I ask a question? What's the difference between now and let me say January of this year, because this is what all of us were doing in January, let me say, before the pandemic. I mean, in which way have you changed your processes, or have you changed them at all or not? Because to me that was the core of the question, was what differentiate the before COVID and after COVID in terms of information?
Lino, that's why I use, of course. Lino, that's why I use the word reinforced, because we had challenges, and as you are right, we were using information from customers, from economic side, of course. We were managing our business with that. But on top of that, you have a pandemic that creates much more uncertainty. So what we did is we reinforced that sources of information, and there is too many information. That's one other problem, and particularly around the effects of the pandemic on many aspects. So you need to be careful, because if you keep doing the things in the same way that you were doing things before the pandemic, probably you are going to or miss some points, or you are going to have sources of information that are not going to be reliable. So it's not the same world that we have in January. It's completely different. So we need to really adapt the way you use information and convert them into insights, because there is so much more uncertainty at this time that you need to be sure that your capabilities are in line with that uncertainty.
No, on the use of information, I completely agree, and on the fact that we are living in very uncertain times that need to complete a different reading of our customers' behavior, I agree as well. What I find difficult to go is to say what I find difficult to understand, or better, maybe it's not my experience, is that I was already overwhelmed with an immensity of data of various kinds about our customers, and really is the information that came was different. Let me say the outcome of our continuous data analysis was different, but the sources of information haven't changed that much. They continue to be the same. Very widespread, as you said, academia, research centers, a lot of marketing, a lot of data points across the value chain, but still the flow is the same. But I completely agree with you, completely different data that come out, and actions that need to be completely different. Redesigning the organization and redesigning the relationship with customers.
Let me ask you a derivative question from this conversation, which I think is very interesting. Is there a way of using or leveraging, in the parlance, a crisis like this, or this new uncertainty as a source of kind of a competitive edge or distinction, or is it just about mitigating the downsides that these may be able to create, or contingency planning? Do you think that, do you think about this as a challenge whereby some organizations will come out much stronger than others depending on how they manage the crisis, or it's just about sort of weathering the storm, the lack of being in industries and countries that are less affected? Or is there something, or do you think about this as something you can kind of, in the long run, benefit from if you are able to manage it well?
Definitely, I think, I strongly believe that when you have risk, you have uncertainty, there are a lot of opportunities, and is the perfect field for innovation, for doing things differently. Of course, you need to be sure that you are going to survive, and that's the first goal is, okay, be sure that we are doing what we have to do to survive all of this. But I strongly believe that the companies that really manage this on a different way are going to find an opportunity. And also, let me tell you this. This is terrible what is happening to the humanity, but on the same time, we are seeing things that on the other way were difficult to see, and many things also accelerated on time. So that's a source of opportunity, because you can move faster, because many behaviors from your customers, the relationship with them, how the society is evolving, how you use technology to focus on things that this pandemic, this situation show you. I think you can leverage on that and find an opportunity to evolve. Definitely, it's if you handle well those uncertainties, and you can read what is happening and you test things at this moment, those could become strong points for the future.
Lino,
Yes.
what do you think? Can this be a source of opportunity?
I agree. Yes, it will be a source of opportunity. I think that it is a moment where the relationship with customers becomes all important, where the need for new services is becoming apparent, where the openness to try new ideas is greater than ever. I think it's a fantastic moment. There is a moment of great risk because, of course, there is a lot of uncertainty, as we said, and you have to be careful not to bet the house on each new initiative, but moment of fantastic opportunity.
Excellent. All right, that's an optimistic note. So recentering the conversation a little bit, I want to touch on the not just the knowledge gathering, but the kind of the people dimension for your organizations. In terms of how you are rethinking in this time, as we're saying, of volatility and uncertainty, have you changed the type of trainings, the type of profiles that you're going to be looking at in terms of hiring? Do you need people that are able? I guess my question is: do you now need a different? Now that this crisis has materialized, do you now need a different type of people in your recruitment programs that has skills to navigate this kind of uncertain future, that has the skills to do things slightly different, more flexibly, more agile, like you mentioned, Lino? Are you changed how you, or are you planning on changing how you recruit and develop your people? Lino, let's go to you since Juan Carlos started.
I think that in terms of recruiting everyone, or I can speak for myself, we have always been looking for good quality people. We now are facing a generational change where you find a lot of people that are very concerned about their quality of life, but much less about their career path. This is, of course, not the kind of problem that you find in a business school with business school students, but it is a very serious problem. Let me give you a practical example. I could hire hundreds of technicians. I cannot find them. I cannot even find them in school willing to be paid and get the proper training for 2 or 3 years and end up with a quite attractive salary at age 22, 23. But of course, they have to use computers, but they have to use their hands as well. And it's not apparently very sexy to be a technician. So this is a generational change that has very little to do with the pandemic. In terms of how the relationship with the people you have is changing. This, I think, it's more important, more central, because right now, because it has changed a lot. We need, as leaders of our companies, we need to talk more with our people. We have, however, to find a way to do it differently. It's really not ideal to talk always in video conference, but if you do so more frequently and you find new ways of relating to your people, I think that can be done as well. We came in a particular juncture in our history. We had values that we had launched 20 years ago, but I felt that we had to focus on certain aspects of our culture that needed particular attention and on which to build the future leg of our development and our growth. And we worked on them quite intensively with a large portion of our employees for the last couple of years, and we're ready to launch it with events that were supposed to be physical events. I mean, open houses, conventions, etc. And then COVID came, and I decided that it made no sense to postpone it. So we went ahead with a series of completely digital event. So we call it a sort of festival that lasted 10, 15 days, and it proved to be very successful. And it also helped very much to connect with our people. So challenges in terms of finding new people, but also challenges in how you deal with, maintain strong the relationship among people and with the top management at the time of crisis where there can be little personal interaction.
Excellent. Juan Carlos, any thoughts on how people development has changed in this time or is likely to change?
Yes, Carlos. We human beings don't like uncertainty. We like to know what is going to happen. And uncertainty was present before, but with this pandemic that was emphasized. So it is very important. And what we are doing is training people to deal with that uncertainty and with that change, because all of this is creating a situation in which people feel insecure, feel that they don't know what is going to happen. So it's not just the hard skills, which are very important, and we need to keep training them on those, but what competencies you give to your people that help them to deal with all of these things that we are living. So uncertainty, adaptability, flexibility. For example, many workers around the world are now working from home. That's a big change. And now we have been, I don't know, for 6 or 8 months working from home. But you need to give tools to people to adapt to this different way of working. So that's one aspect. Flexibility, how you deal with that increased uncertainty and not knowing what is going to happen. You need to train people on that. It is important to give the right tools, the competencies across different studies. And that's why also we are hiring people in fields of social studies that allow us or help us dealing with this. Also, our customers are under a lot of pressure, uncertainty. There is the health situation. It's creating a lot of uncertainty. The effects on the economic part. So dealing also the behavior of the customers are changing. Is changing. I'm sorry. So we need to understand that and to deal with that and adapt the way we respond. So we are training people in soft skills to adapt to this situation. Hard skills are there, and we need to keep training on different aspects, analytics, computer science. All of that is present, but complemented with this way of dealing with all of this uncertainty.
All right, thank you both very. Just very quickly, Lino.
What I'm saying is that this is one of the positive of this crisis, because we were living in a world of uncertainty before, but it was difficult to make people feel that there was this uncertainty. We felt it. A lot of our people didn't feel it. Today, uncertainty is something that is a shared feeling. It's not something that is perceived only by those bookish guys who look ahead and spend their time planning for the long-term future. It is here and with us. And this is of great help in fostering those soft skills that, as a matter of fact, we shall need in the years to come, more so after the pandemic.
Excellent. On that note, I think that's a fitting note to finish. It was been this great panel where we learned a little bit about how your organizations coping with the uncertainty that we experiencing, and we also wanted to learn a little more about the skills that your organizations are fostering or are demanding. And we heard about kind of the increasing demand or the doubling down on analytical skills and kind of forecasting type skills, but also on the soft skills that equip or facilitate the adaptation to a fast-changing world and kind of what needs to be by default an agile organization. So with that, I would like to thank both of you, Juan Carlos Mora and Lino Tedeschi, for spending some of your time with us today, and look forward to the next time. Thank you.